start a recording of this session. So, excellent. Joy is saying, I know manufacturing so well in Business Central. It's a pleasure to meet you, Alfredo. Joy, nice to meet you. I'm happy to hear that we have manufacturing experts today in this webinar. It's important today. We're going to talk about concepts that are fairly advanced, but not too much. So it should be something for, of course, for people who with a good understanding of manufacturing. But this is not for, again, just for experts, right? It's going to be a bit of concept about manufacturing and flushing and consumption, and then a live demo. All right. Okay. A couple of minutes after 6, about 20 people are online, which is great. So we can get started. Good evening, everybody. From your host, Alfredo. Here, Microsoft Certified Trainer and Business Central Functional Consultant. Today, we're going to learn more about how to automate consumption in Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central, consumption of components in manufacturing, so in production orders. And in Business Central terminology, this kind of automation for consumption of components comes with, is called flushing methods. So let's get into it. As I said before, my name is Alfredo Iorio. I am a senior Microsoft Dynamics and Business Central consultant, certified, and I also happen to be a Microsoft Certified Trainer. I worked in this industry for many years, and before I was a supply chain expert. I worked as a supply chain transformation consultant, as a freelancer. Before that, I was essentially managing supply chains for companies in the food and beverage industry. That was few years ago. So today we're going to learn about flushing components. Flushing, which is again the automation that allows us to automatically consume components in Business Central. So, as I said before, flushing, we will learn what flushing is and how to use it for the automation. We will also look at benefits, configuration required, and the different type of flushing methods in Business Central. Let me make my window, there we go, my face a little bit smaller here, because you should be able to read what's in my slides, right? So we will learn how to use it and the difference between flushing by order or by operation, because the two can be a bit misleading, and there is no item set up to define flushing by order or by operation. We will need to use what Business Central calls routing links. And so routing links and flushing allows us to create, to separate, let's say, flushing by order or by operation. So, as I said before, flushing is the automation of consumption of selected components in a production order. If you read the Microsoft Learn manuals, pages for flushing, you will read something about flushing the order. And so we don't really flush the entire order here, even where flushing method is is not linked to an operation. In Business Central, we flush consumption of selected components, which means you can have some components that are automatically flushed, consumed, but other components in the same production order might be set up to be manually consumed with a journal, right? So flushing is not automation of output. That's very important, right? Flushing is the automation of consumption of components, but it can be used on capacity, which is not for today's session. You can automatically post capacity, which is labor, time, and of course associated costs in a production order by using flushing also for capacity. So, but again, it's not going to be something that we will discuss today because it requires probably a separate workshop, right? So we're going to look at consumption of components today. So what are the benefits of using flushing methods? Well, the first one is in inventory evaluation. And that's because value entries, which is the, again, valuation of your inventory transactions. In this case, we're talking about inventory decrease, right? Consumption of components means minus one piece, minus two boxes of certain components. So the valuation of those inventory transactions are created in parallel as the production order progresses, right? So as we progress through the production life cycle, my production order, when my output and my consumption are in parallel, there is that kind of automation, inventory valuation is always accurate. And most important probably for users is about reduced data entry, right? The entire consumption and output recording process can actually be automated. And again, we're going to differentiate between automation of consumption for an entire order or for selected components, but the concept is pretty much similar in terms of benefits. Inventory availability and data entry also, because inventory availability is another benefit of flushing components. With gradual consumption posting, so we post automatically as we go through our manufacturing process, the availability of the components is always up to date. Right, so we're not going to talk about availability for MRP, right? Because a component in a production order is already associated to a demand. So the availability of the component is already decreasing once that component is on a production order, but its actual consumption happens in real time. So real-time inventory availability when we use flushing methods. So when we talk about flushing in Business Central, we need to differentiate between forward flush by order, forward flush by operation, backward flush by order, and backward flush by operation. So let's start with the first one. The first one is forward flush by order. In this case, it's really about the bill of material lines. It's not really the entire order, because each component might have a different flushing methods. So we use forward flush by order on the BOM lines to consume components at the start of the job. And this is an important differentiation between forward flushing and backward flushing. Forward flush means consumption at the start of the job. So for example, when the PO is released, or when it's refreshed, right, depending on how you start your process. So if you start with a firm plan production order and you change it to released, the consumption happens at the stage. Or you can start with a release production order. When you refresh it, the consumption happens. The quantity consumed for that item, component or components on a production order are always equal to the quantity required times the quantity of the parent item to produce. We will see that in an example. It's important to remember that production journals on a production order, production journals and consumption and output journals can still be used. However, the quantity posted, the quantity that we post through a journal when the component is set up to be flushed, will be added to the flush or flushed quantity as we go through the production order. So production journals to consume more, essentially. For example, if you need to post scrap, right? That's a good use case. Forward flush by operation works on routing lines. And so on the routing lines, we set up the link between an operation and the forward flush of the item. So the consumption in this case happens at the start of a specific operation in the routing of the parent item, not at the start of the production order, right? And so the consumption is tied to the operation, again, using routing links codes. So for example, when setup time is registered on a production journal, a setup time registered on a production journal is the beginning of the actual operation. We don't post output, we don't post capacity yet, but we post setup. That setup is the beginning of the operation that triggers the flushing of that component. And here you can see in bold something that I wanted to highlight because it's quite important. By default, right, the posting of the component consumption occurs when you change the status of a production order to released, right? What we saw in the previous slide. when we set up the component to be forward flushed. However, when we use the route and link code on the production order component lines, the posting occurs per operation. And so the routing link for a forward flush item will essentially stop Business Central from consuming the component when we release the order. We will see that in an example live later today. The other flushing method that we're going to look at today is the backward flush, which is, again, can be for backward flush by order, in this case bill of material lines, and or by operation. So backward flush by BOM allow us to consume the components at the end of the job. So for example, when the production order is finished as opposed to released, right? Or when, again, the operation is finished, when we look at the by operation. The quantity consumed is also a quantity required times the quantity of the parent item to produce. Like what we said before for forward flushing, the production journals can also be used here for backward flushing. The posted quantity will be added to the quantity to flush, right? Or that will be flushed once the order is consumed, right? So it is finished. So again, can be used for to post scrap, right? The last flushing methods, let's call it like that, is backward flush by operation. In this case, we also use the routing lines as pretty much what we learn about forward flush by operation. In this case, the consumption happens after the operation is posted, right, instead of before. In this case, it can be capacity only. So you don't have to complete the output, right? The backward flushing by operation allows you to post the time that a user has spent on a particular operation. It can be an operation before the final stage. With that routing link, we can link an operation to the flushing and the automation of the consumption of the components. Again, something that we will see in a live demo in a few minutes. The quantity consumed is the quantity required times the quantity of the parent item to produce. A small note here, this can also be part flushing if we post the output, the quantity of the item to produce in stages. Again, something that we will cover in an example later, right? So let's start with a demo. We're going to look at forward flush by order or operation first, and then backward flush by order or operation. Feel free to share your comments, send me your message, because I can see that live and I'll try my best to answer as I go. If I can't, I will get back to you because the comments will stay on this event here on LinkedIn. So let's go back to the demo. Now let's change the screen, and I need to change here. I need to open my Business Central, and I'm going to log in. And I'm going to select my demo environment that I created for this one. I think it's this one. Excellent. All right. So let's see what we got here. We got flushing demo. There we go. Perfect. So this is what I'm going to try to. Oh, let me make it bigger because it doesn't look nice on the screen. There we go. Let me change it. I need to adjust it. Okay, something I should have done before this live event, but there we go. Now it's too late. Much better, isn't it? Okay, so let's look at this demo now. I have created these three items here in preparation for this demo. We have a Hampshire sofa, which is made of a frame and upholstery. Very simple, just to give you an idea of how this one is done. And on the routing link, on the routing number here, we have essentially two operations. One is the frame painting, when we paint the frame. And the next one is when we put it together, everything. So we assemble the frame and the upholstery. And so we end up with a nice, brand new sofa, right? So the first thing that we're going to look at is the forward flush by order. So let's look at one of the two components, because again, it can be just one of the two components here. We don't need to use the flushing on all components. But once we learn how it works for one component, we will see that the same logic applies to everything. Flushing method on the item card of my component is now set up as forward, right? Manual allows me to post the consumption of this item through a journal. Forward and backward is the flushing methods that we learned so far. The other two are used when you need to create a production order and you have a WMS system in place. So with advanced warehouse, you have the ability to pick and after the pick, the item is automatically consumed. We are not going to look at this today because it requires a bit of warehouse management system and manufacturing, which are arguably the two most complex modules in Business Central. That will require dedicated workshops, which I'm planning to do. But let me know in the comments below if you're interested in something like that, because I will definitely put something together. Again, it's not that intuitive, so it requires a dedicated workshop. So my Hampshire frame is defined with a flushing method forward, and it's important to understand that flushing is all about components. So on my sofa, the flushing method is irrelevant, right? Because flushing is always about when this item is a component in a production order, and because my sofa is the finished item, the flushing method here will not affect what we're going to look at today, right? So my frame is set up with a forward flushing. My upholstery is set up with a manual flushing. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to double check my my production bill of materials, because what I'm going to do now, I'm going to ensure that there is no routing link, because we want to use the forward flush essentially by BOM, right? By order. And so I'm going to clear my routing links. There we go. So now my routing links and my BOMs are without any kind of link. So the frame with the flushing method forward is essentially it's going to be consumed at the start of the operation. And the start of operation means when we release a production order. So I'm going to start from a firm planned production order, and I'm going to create a new firm planned production order, and I'm going to create a production order for my Hampshire sofa. And let's say I want 2 sofas. And my sandbox now is set up to 2028. I mean, it's a random date that I have in my sandbox. So I'm going to refresh the production order. I'm going to schedule it backwards. And given my routing and my operations and my work center calendars, Business Central will calculate the starting date and the end date, right? And so this is fine. If I want to double check my routing, I can see I've got the 60 minutes that I need to spend on painting the frame, and 60 minutes for each sofa, right, for frame and upholstery assembly, which means I will have essentially allocated capacity of about 2 hours for each operation on this work center, right? 120 minutes because I need to assemble 2 sofas, 60 per sofa, right? So the start of an operation of a production order in Business Central is when we change the status from firm plan to released. A released production order in Business Central is what allows us to start posting components, posting capacity, posting output. So it's the beginning of the operation. If I click on yes, posting automatic consumption, actually it already showed that. So we already you can see that it has worked already. So if I look at my released production orders for my Hampshire sofa, which should be this one, yes, 28. And if I check my orders, my order entries, my item ledger entries show the consumption of the frame, right? So at the start of the operation, as soon as I release the order, the two frames for the two sofas have been consumed, right? And now what I can do, I can go on and look at my production journal, and I can see the manual flushing lines, which is going to be the consumption of the upholstery, which again requires the journal, and the runtime and the output for the frame, right? So as I said, I'm going to have 120 minutes here, 120 minutes here, and I am fine. I can post the journal, and so I can complete it, right? Journal are done. Quantity, finished quantity 2, because I posted the last line of my operation. So when I change the status to finished, all done. So you can see very simple forward flushing at the beginning of the operation, right? Quite straightforward. And when do you want to use this method? Again, it's really about, maybe for a frame and a sofa, it's not really the right use case for that. But you want to forward flush things that are for which you don't really need to check too much in terms of quantity. So, for example, if you start an operation, if actually in this sofa, it's a good example. If I included in my production bill of material something like nails and screws, right? Like small things that I need to put into a sofa will probably have like a few hundred screws, right, or nails. So you are unlikely to check and pick 150 nails for the sofa, right? What you want to do as you start the operation, you consume these 200 nails that you take from your from a box, from a bucket, right? And you want to consume them as you start the operation. So you know that in your assembly department, you got the nails to do that job, right? So that's an example of forward flushing by order, and it's important to remember that it's by bill of material line. So in our example, we forward flush the frame, well, we didn't for the upholstery, right? So Business Central supports that. Of course, if you want to consume both, you just need to ensure that both items are set up with forward flushing. Very simple. So what happens now if I want to forward flush by operation? And so if I look at the operations, which is in the routing, you can see that for this Hampshire sofa, I have 2 operations. Now again, this is very simplified, right? In a real business scenario, you have more than 2 operations, but it's just something that will help us understand how this works. I can decide, I can set up Business Central to say that when I start my frame painting operations, and I created 2 on purpose because I want to show you that the last operation is irrelevant to what we're going to do here. I want to consume my frame, I want to take it out of inventory as soon as I start, or I can even prep for my painting, right? So if I am going to put this one under development and I say that, you know what, I need 10 minutes of setup time for each, that would be a good prep time, right? Setup time 10 minutes. I need 10 minutes to prep my my painting room. And so let me go back to under development. And now what I can do here, I can link this operation with a routing link assembly, and I can link it to the actual bill of material. So at the start of the of this painting operation, I can forward flush the item. So I'm going to set up the routing link here on the routing, and then I need to go back to the production bill of material here, and I need to link this item, which will be the consumption of this item, so quantity per, with the same routing link, assembly. And I'm going to certify it. Notice that the item here, the frame item, is still forward flashing, right? And you will see how the consumption of the item now, as I release the production journal, will not happen, because the routing link will will allow me to link the consumption on an operation and not on the order. So let's do the same, right? Let's do what we did before, which is firm planned production orders. And I'm going to create a new production order for the same item, right? My Hampshire sofa. There we go. And I want 2 sofas. I'm going to refresh the production order and scheduling backwards. That's very good. Right. Looks like all right. So the routing and the components are okay. Now the routing shows the setup time and the runtime, as I said before. So my allocated capacity will show the setup time and the runtime. Important. You see, this is the send ahead type. It's input. This is what allows me to post ahead. And setup time is always by the operation. So it's 10 minutes of setup time for the entire order. There is a way to do that using to change it using essentially batches, but we'll not look at that today. So as I change the status now and I change it to released, notice that I didn't get any message about posting consumption, right? I just got a message, a confirmation message saying that my order has been changed to released. So let's look at the released production order. And this is my new order, and let's check on the order entries. Nothing happened, right? And this is where most users and sometimes even consultants really are surprised, get surprised when I show them to this page, because after all, I got a flushing methods on forward, right? So we start the order is released, the production order, and I should see the consumption, right? The routing lengths allow me to change the setup, change the behavior of the system, because now the system is waiting for that specific operation to start, not the entire order. And that's why if you check Microsoft Learn, Microsoft documentation, it shows, it calls the other method forward by order and not by operation, which can be misleading, right? But this is essentially it, right? When the order is released, the item is still forward flush, but nothing has been consumed. If I look at the production journal, I still see my 3 items manual that requires manual flushing. If I look forward, I see the Hampshire frame, which is forward flush, but it's not been flushed, right? And as I said before, I can still add consumption here, which will be added on top of it, on top of what's going to happen when I essentially when I start my operation. I don't want to do that. So now we have 2 operations, right? The first one, frame painting, and the other, which is the output. So you might remember that there is a routing link between the frame painting and the consumption of my sofa frame. So I'm going to zero in these 2. I'm going to zero in the output, because all I want to do is to post, is to register 10 minutes of setup time for my frame painting. Now this can happen within the production journal. It can happen to a let's say consumption journals, if I'm correct, or it's a no, it's not a consumption journal. It's an output journals that I can create. An output journal. I can start, working on this one. You can see I created one before that, but really it depends on how you work, right? So it can happen on a separate journal, or it can happen within the production journal, the production order. When to choose one or the other? If your production order is managed within the desktop app by a user operating in Business Central, my recommendation is to use the production journal. However, if you got terminals, like tablets, right, iPads next to your workstations, you might want to set up specific output journals, because in this case the painting department, right, the painting room will have a dedicated iPad where they see the painting jobs of all the items, And that can include multiple production orders, right? So it really depends on how you work. Again, I'm digressing here. I'm getting into consulting mode instead of training mode. So setup time, 10 minutes. If I go in preview posting, that's what we got. And this is really the flushing by operation, right? At the beginning of the operation, we didn't post any consumption. We didn't post any output, right? Because the item ledger entry is all about the consumption of the frame, right? Including the costs. So my inventory valuation, my inventory availability, it's always in sync. So in terms of accuracy, that is really the best thing you can do here if you want that. So a frame has entered the painting room. It's been immediately, we set it up, and the two frames are taken out of stock immediately. Now, if I don't use this setup time, but I say that I spent, let's say, 30 minutes on this operation already, actually, 30 minutes without setup time, it doesn't really make any sense, but really, in a real business case, because you want to prep before you actually paint. But again, I just wanted to show you that runtime, even though it's not the beginning of the operation, when it's actually we are doing the operation, still allows me to post, right? So the routing link still allows me to post. So I don't need to post output, right? It's the beginning of the operation. So I'm going to actually do a setup time here. So 10 minutes to set up the room and no runtime, right? And I'm going to post it. All right. And so now I can see, as I said before, right, the entries, there we go. And the ledger entries now show my consumption, right? So the next thing I need to do now is to look at the production journal and say that I'm going to consume the upholstery because I'm done with painting, and assembly requires 10 minutes, 120 minutes, and I'm going to post the actual output, right? So this is standard production. Posted, and it's fine. And now all I need to do, change the status, I'm done. There we go. So this is, you can see that the difference between flushing by order, when I flush the entire consumption as I start my order essentially, so when I release it, as opposed to using routing links and flushing methods, which allow me to post at the beginning of a selected operation, right? So let's change things now, right? Let's change everything and let's move to backward flushing. And I'm going to change it on the Hampshire frame because it will allow us to see the difference using the same context essentially. So now I'm going to choose backward flushing, and I'm going to remove the routing links from my production bill of material and the routing. So we're going to back flush by order, right? This is certified, so I can use it. The routing also must be changed under development, and now I'm going to change it here, and I'm going to delete this one. Right, so the setup is correct now. This one is certified. So Hampshire frame is now backward flushing, set up as to with the backward flushing method, and I don't have any routing link. So we're going to back flush by order, which means the flushing happens at the end of the operation. So I'm going to start with a firm plan production order, although it's not going to make any difference because again we are flushing at the end of the operation, right? So I'm going to create another order for my two sofas. I'm going to change the status, right? Very good. So I'm going to look for released production orders, and on my released production orders the sofa is here, and of course with backward flushing, right, nothing happens. Oops, did I miss a step? There we go. I think I should have refreshed it. So it's okay. Let's go back to released production order. I think I missed a passage. Yes. Anyway, we can refresh it here. Doesn't matter because we're backward flushing. Nothing's going to happen. There we go. So what happens here now? If we look at the production journal, I still see only 3 lines because now my flushing method filter on backwards show the Hampshire frame. And as I said before, if I add more consumption here, it will just add to the 2 frames that the Business Central will automatically consume when I change the status of this order. So I'm not going to do anything here. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go ahead and post the consumption of my upholstery. I'm going to tell Business Central that I have used 10 minutes to set up my painting room and 120 minutes to paint to two frames, 10 minutes to set up the room where I put together the upholstery, and 120 minutes, because 60 minutes for item. I'm going to post everything here. And because we backflush by order and not by operation, if I look at the entries now, you will see that something is missing. I have the output of 2 sofas. I have the consumption of the upholstery, but the consumption of the frames didn't happen, right? Because again, it's backward flushing by order and not by operation. To flush, essentially, to consume the 2 frames that I need to consume to make my 2 sofas, I need to change the status of the order. And I need to change it as finished. So the order is finished. It's the end of the entire production process, to call it like that. And then you might have noticed posting consumption automatically. They showed for a couple of seconds, right? If we look at the finished production order for my Hampshire sofa, now you can see that in my item ledger entries, I also got the consumption. And if you look at the entry numbers, you can see they are in sequence because the consumption of my frame happened after the consumption of the upholstery, the output, and this one it's got essentially the entry number is higher, and it shows that it's been done afterwards, right, when I change the status of the order. So backward flushing by order means at the end of the operation, at the end of all the operations, when I finish my production order, I end up with the consumption. Perfect for automation. A downside of using this kind of method is that now that the order is finished, it's too late to change things if we made a mistake, right? Because I cannot add more capacity, I cannot post more time, I cannot post scrap on this order. All I can do is essentially to post journals, which is not ideal. So most organizations really don't want to go to the point where the order is finished and then go back and try to fix things. You should really try to avoid that. So let's say then the other method which allows us to backflush at the end of selected operations, which will allow you to still have that kind of automation, but on the release production order, so you can still change things before finishing the order, right? So I'm not going to touch the item because backward flushing method is still applies, it's still what I want to do. But what I need to do now is to do pretty much what I did before. I need to link an operation to the routing, to essentially to bill of material lines, right? So I'm going to do the same here, and I'm going to do it on assembly because it's not the last operation, and I will show you the difference between these two. In fact, there's a third demo that I want to show you, because putting the routing link on the first operation or adding it to the last operation changes things and changes things quite a lot, because with the second one we can link the consumption to the actual output and not to the capacity, essentially labor. So let's see how it works. I'm going to certify this one, routing link 100 on the first operation, and I'm going to change the under development, and I'm going to add a routing link here, 100 assembly. There we go, certified. And let's do the same, shall we? Firm planned production order, and I'm going to create another order for my lovely sofa. Hampshire sofa. 2 sofas, and I'm going to refresh the order, which I forgot to do a few minutes ago. There we go. I'm going to change the status now to released, and I got my released production order. Let's go back here, released production order, and I see my Hampshire sofa now. Right, so now that I got my backwards flushing assigned to this operation, now the backward flushing will work on the runtime and the output here. Okay, so remember that we are really posting output on here only, but the reason why there is an output quantity here. So if I set up my 10 minutes here, I'm going to delete the output here and the output here, because I just want to show you 10 minutes of setup time, preview posting, no item ledger entry, right? Just 10 minutes of labor that we used for this one. Nothing strange here. Runtime 120 minutes. Actual consumption of capacity here, labor, preview posting, right? Nothing happens. So if I tell Business Central that I spent those 120 minutes of runtime plus 10 minutes of setup time for the 2 sofas that I'm going to produce, I get the item ledger entry. And the item ledger entry is for the consumption of my 2 frames, right? So the end of the operation, right? You can see this one, how this one, how this, let's say the logic about flushing by operation works. So I'm going to essentially post this one, right? And now what I can do here, I'm going to now consume the upholstery, the 2, right? Spend 10 minutes to set up the upholstery room, 120 minutes to complete the job, and also create the output of my 2 sofas, right? And so if I look at preview posting now, I got 2 item ledger entries, not 3, upholstery and sofa, right? I'm not double consuming, not consuming again the frames. So you can see how backward flushing by operation can really help us segregate what we do and when. And so you can have that kind of automation while still having control. If I do that, right, and I'm going to post it, right, my release production order can still be used for, I don't know, scrap, more capacity. Maybe we spent 2 more hours. There was a problem with the sofa, and we need to spend 2 more hours to fix something. I can still post capacity on this order before I essentially I set it as finished, right? And when I change the status as finished, I'm done essentially. So the last thing that I want to show you now, is for already 45 minutes, so we are great, we're doing right on time, is the difference between production and routing links for the last operation as opposed to the first operation, because now we're going to have even more automation, and this time I'm going to show you the automation between output and consumption in terms of physical inventory, right? So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to change this one, the routing to under development, and move essentially the routing link from the first operation to the last operation. In Business Central, the last operation is also the operation where output happens, right? So when this operation is complete, we post output. So in this case, my sofas are produced at the end of this operation. That's got nothing to do with flushing, right? Remember what I said earlier before. Flushing is about consumption components. What I'm going to show you here about output, it's not related to flushing method. It's how Business Central works. So I'm going to put this one under, let's say, certified. And now the automation between the consumption of my frame is linked to frame and upholstery assembly. And that allows me to do something slightly different, but sometimes it can really be a great time saver. So firm planned production orders again. We plan the production order for another set of sofas. I'm going to create 10 sofas now because I will show you how it works. I'm going to refresh it. And now I'm going to change the status to released. Very good. I'm going to actually release production order. And now let's look at this one. We got pretty much the same. You can see upholstery, 10. And of course the painting and upholstery assembly of 10. Now that my routing link, my automation, has linked the last operation and not the first one, I can, let's say, avoid doing this one, and this one is pretty much irrelevant. If I spend, let's say, in this case it's going to be 600, right? And if I look at preview posting, I see now the frame and sofa, and that's because I forgot to take out this one. Sorry, there we go. I will show that nothing happens here because I'm not posting the last one. So preview posting, there we go, nothing happens, right? So the first operation is complete. Even though I have an output quantity of 10, I don't really get any output here because the output only happens with the last operation. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to say I spent 10 minutes to set up the room. I painted all my frames and it's fine. But I am going to consume frames and upholstery as I go. Because in this case, my assembly room is not big enough for 10 sofas. I can only produce 2 sofas at a time. And so what happens when a team needs to can only produce 2 sofas at a time? I'm going to say 120 minutes. I'm going to say 2 sofas. And now look at what happens when I go in preview posting. I got 2 item ledger entries, but I'm consuming 2 frames because I am creating output of 2 sofas, right? So the routing link and the backward flushing by operation, when operation is the last operation, allows me to sync essentially the physical output, the quantity or physical inventory of the output to the physical inventory of the consumption. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to say, you know what, I have consumed 2 sets of upholstery, right? I'm done with all my paintings, but my painting are still frame in inventory. Whether it's painted or not, I still want to see my frames in inventory. I just want to consume my frames as I create output on my sofas, which in this case, it looks like the right thing to do, right? So 2 consumed, 2 output, the routing link allow me to post the consumption of the 2, right? Perfect, right? And so if I look at, let's say, finished quantity 2, so I'm going to open the production journal here, and now I can keep going, right? I don't need more setup time. I only need 120 minutes for 2 sofas, and I can post more sofas, right? And so I can essentially keep this one open as I go. And the backward flushing by operation, when the backward flushing happens as the last operation, you can see allows me to keep track of what happens by operation, consumption and output. Consumption and output, you can see how Business Central keeps these 2. The document is still the same, essentially, right? Because it's a production order, but those are, right, separate entries. And so now in this case, let's complete this one, 6, and it's going to be 60 times 6, 360 minutes, and I'm going to post it, right? Very good. And now as I change the status to finished, no more backward flushing happens, because again, backward flushing is set up by operation, right? So you can see how the flushing methods can be quite flexible, right? It doesn't just have it doesn't have to be for the entire order for everything. It can be only for certain items for the entire order. It can be for certain items for certain operations, right? And so it really allows us to play with it and have a lot of flexibility. So I hope you find it interesting. It's 52 minutes since we went live, so we still got 8 minutes. So if you got any question, I'm going to change back to my presentation. There we go. And so let me log in and see if you got any. There we go. Joey, since the flushing method is backward, why don't you create a release production order directly? It's not mandatory to create a firm plan, then change it to release. Is that right? It's correct, Joey. Thanks for that point. It's not necessary to create a to start from a firm plan production order. However, in my opinion, it's good practice to show you that in a demo, because most of the time, when you create a production order, you create a production order starting from a MPS or a master production schedule or MRP. It's quite unlikely, right, in a real business scenario, to see people, users creating the production order straight into released. But that's entirely possible. So it would just mean to show you, how the process should really look like. Firm planned after master production schedule, then released, then finished. But Joey, you're right. You can start from a release production order. Absolutely. Let's see. Joy says, I'm interested about WMS manufacturing. Thank you. I will really, I will try to, I will set up something soon. Also on the question, can you include the scrap on a specific item just to see how it is recorded using these two methods? I'm sorry that I noticed your question now. It's only 3 minutes, but yes, you can include the scrap on a specific item. You can include the scrap on the bill of material. And in the last example, when I have backward flushing by operation with the last operation, Business Central will consume the quantity required for the consumption and the scrap. So you can have scrap automatically calculated and posted with flushing method. Of course, as I said before, if you want to post the scrap manually, you need to use a journal, right? Lubab Mustafa, looking for a fleet management add-on. We are all, most of us, Lubab, are looking for a fleet management add-on. I worked on a couple of implementations last year where the client needed a fleet management add-on, and I ended up suggesting a third-party application. I'm not going to share it here because I'm not affiliated with them, and this is training. This is a training workshop. It's not for advertising, right, or selling anything. But if you're interested, send me a message. I will send you the name of this third-party fleet management software that you can interface with Business Central. Interface is API-based. It's very simple. But yes, it would be nice to have a proper add-on. I'm sure there are ISVs out there who can do that. But a dedicated fleet management software interface to Business Central sometimes does the job. Excellent. There is a question from Yusuf that Joey answered. That's really nice. Thanks a lot. About costing, but again, I'll keep asking questions, keep writing your comments, because if I will have the opportunity to read your comments afterwards and comment later. Well, it's 6:55, 5 minutes to go. But we're done today, so I think we can close it here. Again, send me your questions, write your comments here, or send me a direct message if you are connected on LinkedIn. My profile is open anyway, so you can send me a message, and let me know if you find it beneficial. And the next one, it's going to be about warehouse management system. I got quite a lot of requests about warehouse management, so we will start. I will probably in a couple of weeks' time give a demo, like on LinkedIn Live, training, not a demo, LinkedIn training session about WMS, and eventually we will end up with WMS and manufacturing and see how the two modules work together. It's a bit complex, but if we go through and we learn the basics, if we go through it slowly, we will manage to learn it. Excellent, Nicola. Thank you all. Thanks you all for attending. It's been great, and have a great rest of the day.